Well, hello, beautiful people, and thanks for joining me today in part 21 on this many-part journey that we have titled The Journey. We are on the book Patriarchs and Prophets, the first of 5 books that we're discussing of Ellen White, and we are in chapter 21, and chapter 21 is titled Joseph and His Brothers. Last time, the chapter dealt about the life of Joseph in Egypt, and we saw how God blessed him in everything he did. He did have some struggles along the way, or we should probably say a lot of struggles. But of course, God rewarded his faithfulness and his, honest character. And he is now the governor in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. Of course, that is a powerful position, and in this position now, he was there because he translated a dream for Pharaoh, and he had, predicted with the help of God that Egypt was going to see 7 years of abundance in terms of food and agriculture, and then he was going to see 7 years of famine, of severe, intense famine, where the land will not produce anything. And he had a plan. Pharaoh put him as a governor, and now this chapter picks up here. The 7 years of, a lot of producing, of like abundance, went underway. There was a lot of food being produced. Joseph created and built food storages across Egypt, and he saved a lot of food, needless to say. And now the 7 years of famine starts, and of course, famine attacks the families in Egypt, and Pharaoh directed the people, the Egyptians, to Joseph so that he could do, whatever he wanted to do in terms of distributing the food. So Joseph started selling the food back to the Egyptians, and when the Egyptians ran out of money, he started taking the property and the cattle. So during the reign of Joseph, Egypt became very, very wealthy. Of course, this famine also affected, and this is the most important part of the story, affected Jacob and his family. And this is the story that follows is basically a story that teaches us a lot, but mainly the importance of forgiveness and love to God and to others. So Jacob and his family are now far away from Egypt, and famine hits them and they're hungry. So Jacob tells Joseph's brothers to please go and get food from Egypt. They travel to Egypt. And once they get to Egypt, guess who they met there? They met their brother Joseph. However, they did not recognize Joseph as Joseph, but Joseph did recognize them as his brothers. And when they meet, together, the Joseph brothers go on their feet and bow in front of the governor of Egypt, which they don't know is Joseph. And this is one of those times where almost any human would be tempted to think that this is payback time. But this is not what came, to the mind of Joseph. Joseph, of course, cried. It was a difficult moment to see his brothers, and they didn't recognize him. But instead of, paying and avenging right away the evil that they had done to him, he decided to put them under a test. He wanted to test if these brothers were truly, had changed from the time that they sold him to the Egyptians. So he looks around and he noticed that all of his brothers are there except for Benjamin, which was Joseph's small brother, younger brother by the same mother. And he started thinking in his mind, why is he not here? Is he not here because they have done to Benjamin the same thing that they did to me? So he starts a test to, get the information from them. What he does is he, locks them in jail, and he says, no, you are spies. You're not here to buy food. You're here because you want to spy the land and you don't see what we have. And of course, the brothers say, no, we're not spies. We're definitely here because our family is hungry back home. We need food. And because they told him, Joseph asked, do you have, another brother? And they say, yes, there's another smaller brother that stayed home because of our father didn't want to let him go. And Joseph takes this as an opportunity to say, okay, so you will prove that you are not lying and that you are not spies if you go and come back here with your small brother. There was a struggle between the brothers and Joseph, but eventually they resolved the struggle by leaving Simeon in Egypt in jail. Simeon was the head, the master head when it came to selling Joseph out. So he's now stays in jail, and then all of the brothers go back to Canaan to go, get Benjamin. Of course, they knew after what had happened to Joseph, they knew that Jacob was not going to let Benjamin come back to Egypt because, of course, he loved his son and he didn't want to lose him like he lost Joseph. We got to remember that these two were the children of Rachel, the woman that he loved and he wanted to marry, and he worked 14 years to get. So the brothers get back to Canaan. And Jacob, of course, as expected, he did not want to let Benjamin go back. There was another struggle in the family. They asked him to please let them go back with Benjamin so they can retrieve Simeon. Jacob says no. At this point, he had lost Simeon and he had lost Joseph. He didn't want to lose Benjamin. So everything stays normal. They just eat through the food that they have brought back from Egypt. And as the food once again starts running out. So Jacob has no choice but to let Benjamin go back with the brothers to Egypt to get food. So the brothers return to Egypt, and Joseph sees those brothers come back, see that they come with the small brother, and once again he weeps because that's his tiny brother. And here he decides to cast yet another test. So he invites them out to eat with him dinner. And at dinner, he serves Benjamin much more than he serves the other brothers. And then he's hearing them talk. And of course, he noticed at this time, we gotta remember, Joseph spoke Egyptian at this point. He also spoke Hebrew, but he spoke Egyptian mainly. And the brothers spoke Hebrew. And the brothers thought, they don't know Joseph is Joseph. So the brothers thought that the governor, that Joseph, spoke only Egyptian. So they were talking in Hebrew, not knowing that Joseph understood what they were saying. And he did not get a hint of, revenge or anger towards Benjamin. So he decides to do yet another test. And in this test, he, gives them food so that they go back to their families. And as he gives them food, he hits one of the cups in the food bag that Benjamin was carrying. So as they're leaving Egypt, the servant of Joseph goes to them and accuses them of, treason, because they came to Joseph's home and they went away stealing from Joseph. Of course, they denied that vividly. They had not stolen anything. And he said, okay, so I'm going to open all of your food bags. And if I find something, whoever's person's bag I find something, I will, keep as a servant forever. And the rest of you may go. And you know what happened, right? They opened the bags and they found the cup of Joseph in Benjamin's bag. And the brothers go down on their knees in desperation, tore their clothes apart, say, no, please, this is a mistake. And then each of them, these multiple ones, start offering themselves in lieu of Benjamin so that Benjamin could return to his father. And the whole scene moved Joseph to the point that he eventually told, you know what, I am Joseph. And you can only imagine the shock in these people's minds. And just as Joseph was reminded of the dreams he had as a child of his brothers bowing to them, they also remembered those dreams, and they realized that all along, God was basically prophesying to them. And they realized what they'd done. Everybody weeps, they hug each other. Joseph asked for his father, and of course, he asked for his father to be brought to him. He could not leave Egypt. He's the governor of Egypt. And plus, there was famine in the land, so they were better off coming to Egypt. So the brothers go out and they bring the father back, and all this that we have said is the first few pages of the chapter. Most of the chapter dwells on what happened once Jacob came back. Once Jacob came back, of course, he sees his son Joseph, and he is, needless to say, more than pleased. The brothers had to go through the humiliating task of accepting to their father what they had done, confessing what they had done to Joseph, and now they are faced with the truth. But Jacob, just as Joseph did, of course, forgave them for their evilness. And Jacob, really all he wanted was to see Joseph again. So they come back to Egypt. Jacob meets Joseph. They hug, and now they are in Egypt. And at this point, they had not multiplied too much, but we gotta remember that God had made a promise to Jacob and his descendants since the times of Abraham that they were going to multiply. And for this to happen, of course, they needed to be in a land that is prosperous and with food and whatnot. So Joseph asked Pharaoh for a land, and Pharaoh tells him, you know what? You have done so much good for Egypt that you can have the best of the land of Goshen. That is for you and your family, and you and your family can live there and dwell there. At this point, the family, this is relevant to the conversation of next chapter when we next talk. The family is now, all of Jacob's family is in Egypt, located in the land of Goshen, the best of the land, and we can say they were living tax-free. Because the position of Joseph, they had access to food and the resources that the Egyptians did not, because the Egyptians had to sell their goods in exchange for food. Of course, Jacob and his family did not need to do that. And again, this is relevant to the next chapter when we talk about Moses. But now Jacob is in his literally last few days, not few days, but few years of life. And here's a few lessons that Ellen White touches that I want to touch on. The first one is, Jacob saw peace in his life during his last years on earth. So Jacob had lived a pretty tumultuous life. He had seen a lot of pain, suffered a lot of pain from his sons, from his family, from his uncle when he was working for his wife. He was cast out from his home. He never saw his mom and dad again. Jacob had a pretty rough life. But through it all, he decided to honor God, and towards the end of his life, God gave him what any person could wish for, a peaceful last few years on planet Earth with his family in a land that was prosperous, without, famine attacking them. And as they were in Egypt, he were able to see, his grandkids and grandkids, and, he saw certainly a lot. And it was a moment of peace for Jacob. And second, he had time to, connect with God, and God revealing to him the future through the blessing that he was going to pass down to his sons as, he passes away. And we got to remember that of the sons of Jacob and of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, God was going to, form eventually the 12th tribe of Israel. So the character that describes what the sons of the character that described the blessing of God to his sons was going to be basically prophetically as to how the future generations of that particular son of that tribe were going to be. And Ellen White talks about the blessing that Jacob gave to his sons. And Reuben, of course, was the initiator of much evil, and Reuben lost his birthright. So instead of Reuben, Joseph, there's not a Joseph tribe, but his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, they are part of the 12th tribe. So Jacob virtually adopted Joseph's son into his, so that they could receive part of the blessing. And again, a blessing that Reuben lost. And then he talks to Levi. Levi had been faithful to God while many others hadn't. So Levi received the blessing of, eventually we know from Israel, or if you don't know, we will get there. The tribe of Levi were responsible for the sanctuary and for carrying God's things, and basically were the ministers of Israel. And then he talks about Judah. Judah, he says that the scepter will not, when Jacob pronounced the blessing, he said that the scepter shall not depart from Judah until the coming of Shiloh, of course, Jesus. So we knew that through the lineage of Judah was going to come David, and these names that everybody knows, and eventually Jesus himself, which is a beautiful prophecy and very relevant to what happened to Israel over and over through generations. So that's our second lesson, that God, through Jacob, cast the blessing off to the sons of Jacob so that they eventually became the tribe. And then the final had to do with the things that are happening behind the scenes, if you may. So how do we explain this? In the grand history, in the grand theme of history, there's a play and a counterplay, and we have to see the stories in the Old Testament as God making a move, and then Satan, the enemy, making a move. And in this particular case, this famine was a plot behind the scenes of Satan to destroy Jacob. And of course, Satan had tried to destroy his family before. He had cast out Joseph away, but God, through the mud and through the take, God is like playing, and Satan is counterplaying to the scenes that we see on the stories themselves. And I'm not gonna go too much into details, but for every play that Satan makes to try to destroy God's people, God is playing in the background for the benefit of his people. And that is beautiful and important to know, because we all, suffer and we all pass through turbulences. And it's important to know that God will be with us through it all. And looking here at the book, that's pretty much what the chapter talks about. Of course, it's a longer chapter than normal. It's longer than the others, but not less important. And I want to read a paragraph here about the Bible, because Ellen White, before closing the chapter, she talks about the importance of the Bible showing bad traits in people's characters. And he says, inspiration faithfully records the faults of good men, those who were distinguished by the favor of God. Indeed, their faults are more fully presented than their virtues. This has been a subject of wonder to many, and has given the unbeliever occasion to scoff at the Bible. But it is one of the strongest evidence of truth of Scripture, that facts are not glossed over, nor the sins of its chief characters suppressed. The minds of men are so subject to prejudice that it is not possible for human histories to be absolutely impartial. Had the Bible been written by uninspired persons, it would no doubt have presented the character of its honored men in a more flattering light. But as it is, we have a correct record of their experiences. So this is basically saying that the Bible, yet another reason to trust and believe the Bible, is that the Bible does not concern itself to presenting only the good. In the Bible, there were men that did horrible things, that did horrible deceivement, murder, lying. But despite that, God worked through them to make them men of faith. And we got to remember this as a theme in the Bible. It's not all peaches and cream, it's not all beautifulness. And that is why we can trust the Bible, because it's not meant to paint anybody in a light that is none but what actually happened. And the Bible is not afraid of presenting the bad traits of people, and also how God, through those bad traits, worked for his purpose. So there it is, Joseph and his brothers. Few lessons. Let's summarize here. The first, God is in control. The second, God knows the future, and God knows where we are all heading and going. This is, described by the dream that Pharaoh had. Of course, God never forgets his and always keeps his promises. A few chapters ago, when he talked to Abraham, God had said that his people, that Abraham's descendants were going to be slaves in a land for 400 years, and now we're here. Now we're in that land in Egypt. And the next chapter that we see in this is the chapter of Moses in this book and in the Bible too. Meaning, this is where the people of God really multiplied and suffered what they suffered before God took them out. That again is our next chapter. So, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you next time.